right, hello. I'm coming live again. I just did a live and then realized that my laptop was using the microphone of the Bluetooth microphone in the other room, and of course, that didn't work out well. So, doing it again, welcome back to From Logic to Living, day 8. And today I want to talk about the lie of linear progress and the constant hustle. Yeah, so I think very much what we've been told is progress is linear, right? And this means what you put in is what you get out. And we're trained to have instant reward, or at least a very predictable and foreseeable and rather instant outcome. So when I go to work, I get my salary at the end of the month. When I work more hours, potentially I get a bit more salary. Yeah, and there is this very linear relationship between input and output, and this is what we're sold to, or what we're conditioned to. And why I want to talk about this today is because this is what you need to unlearn if you want to build something. If you want to build something that you're passionate about, that you love doing. And I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be a business, it can also be other things, right? Where in the beginning, you put work in, you put energy in, and you maybe don't necessarily see instant results. And what we forget often is that when we don't see, we question things way too soon, right? When things don't work, we immediately say, oh, that's not working, or we check all the time and we want to see confirmation, is this now working? And if you don't get instant validation, if you don't get instant, the instant result, or if you don't, get exactly the outcome that you want immediately, then people often give up. And this is also why entrepreneurship or building a business is hard, because we're trained to see instant results and we are not patient enough. However, what we forget is that when we build a business, the curve is not linear, but it's exponential. At least you want it to be exponential, right? If it works, it can be exponential. And that means in the beginning of the curve, it's long, it's often very flat, not much is happening. But then when you get to a certain point, it really grows fast. Whereas for the linear curve, you have growth all the time, but you're growing at a constant rate. On the exponential curve, the growth really speeds up in the end. So if you get to that point where then the growth becomes exponential, you're also overtaking the linear curve by a huge margin. But we're so used to, just getting instant reward and instant validation, because we need to know that things are working, right? We don't really have this trust or this patience, and oftentimes our nervous system gets very activated, and we don't feel safe when no money is coming in, or we feel instant shame when things are not working, because we think, oh, maybe we're failing, and then what are other people thinking, and oh my god. And also there's this need, like what I talked about in a previous video, is we immediately want to know that this has a good ending. Yeah, and we need instant proof that things are working out, because we're not good at building trust in life, in ourselves, and we're not good at creating safety from within. So regulating our nervous system, because many of us, our nervous systems kind of rebel if we don't see instant results, if we don't also, I mean, I don't know, how would you feel if you didn't know what amount of money would come in next month? Would you be fine with holding that uncertainty? or would your nervous system go all crazy and freak out? And also, we're this, and then at the same time, I think also what we see a lot is that people burn out in this entrepreneurial stage or also in startups because we're taught that hustle mode is the only way to success. And we are constantly, yeah, trapped in this productivity trap where people feel guilty when they don't do anything. They don't even give themselves time to rest or replenish. They think they need to be constantly productive, even though, I mean, your productivity certainly declines if you don't give yourself rest or if you uh, always doing something. But we don't see that, right? We just want to be busy all the time, and we don't really look, is that really moving the needle? Am I producing really good results here? Or, I mean, oftentimes it would just make sense to take some time to also, let your creativity flourish again. Because if you're constantly doing something, you're just in execution mode. But that doesn't mean you're creative. That doesn't mean you're innovative. That doesn't mean you're building something meaningful and good. So, effort and hard work is not the only answer. This doesn't mean you don't have to do things. It doesn't mean you don't have to show up, right? But for me, the art and the key is really, how do you stay grounded? How do you show up for the things you got to do, but then also not work yourself to the bone? And this is sometimes harder than it sounds, because when we do something and when we work hard, we fall back into this illusion of control, right? We think the more we put in, the more we get out. And while it may be true to a certain extent, if you burn yourself out, you definitely gonna go on a diminishing return. Also, if your well-being takes a dip, if your overall energy takes a dip, if your creativity takes a dip, then you're going into the diminishing return zone, so to say. Now, why do we do this? So we do this because we are stuck in a belief system. In a belief system that tells us success needs to be hard, we need to be productive all the time. And I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, do you believe that you have to exhaust yourself to be successful? Do you believe that success needs to be hard? So I created a life. So when I left my corporate job and I started freelancing, and after a while, my freelancing life was so much more ease and freedom and lightness compared to my corporate job. And the crazy thing was, I made more money than I made before in my corporate full time job, even though I was only working 3 days a week. So my monthly gross salary was higher doing this freelance job, this freelance project, working only 3 days a week compared to my full time corporate salary. And yes, you don't get paid when you're sick, and you don't get paid when you go on vacation when you're freelancing. But even if I assume that, I only work 10 months a year, and then I take that number and multiply it by 10, it still would exceed my corporate salary, my full-time corporate salary. Now, what needed to happen for me to create this life? The first thing that needed to happen for me to create this life was the belief that something with more ease, more joy, more freedom, more abundance was possible. So you first need to believe that everything can be better, it can be easier. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to give up financial means. But of course, if you don't believe that this is possible, you won't go after it, right? That is why our belief system is so important. Okay, so today what I want you to contemplate and think about is, Are you pushing yourself to be productive? Are you someone who feels guilty when they don't do anything? And do you believe that effort equals success? Or do you believe that there is other ways? And what I mentioned before is a key part to this is being able to work with our nervous system, being able to regulate our nervous system. And it doesn't mean you have to be super calm and super relaxed all the time. You know, if you expand into something new, if you do new things, it's also normal that your nervous system feels a bit more activated. But can you regulate it to a point where you don't get paralyzed, or where you don't, freak out and go into panic mode? So for example, if you become self-employed or start your own business, and all of a sudden the flow of money is not as predictable as it was before when you were employed, can you hold that? Can you stay calm? Can you still move? Can you build that trust? And a lot of that is working with your nervous system, working with your body. And if this is something you would like to learn, I created a series called Reconnect and Realign. And it's a 3-part series. And we're going to work with Kundalini yoga, breath work, and sound. And these are the 3 tools that I used at first to regulate my nervous system and to come out of this over functioning, this high functioning numbness. Yeah, so I was definitely in also what you call sympathetic overdrive, so where your nervous system is constantly activated and you don't come back into this rest and digest mode. And this often happens when we haven't learned how to regulate our nervous systems, or we're not taking the time. And this is not just, exercise helps you regulate your nervous system, but oftentimes we also need more yin energy to really come back into this rest and digest state, especially, if we've been activated for a while. So yeah, this series is great if you want to reconnect with yourself and what it is that you really want. And yeah, listen to that voice, being able to connect and come back to yourself, and yeah, learning to build self-trust, learning to work with uncertainty, and reconnecting to your body. And there's a whole other intelligence in your body that is available to you, but you're probably not using to the extent that you could. So this is a 3-part series. You can either join the full series for 55 euros, or if you just want to join a single session, that's also possible. That is 21 euros. We will start next week, Monday. Everything will be online. We will meet on Monday, 6 p.m. Each session will be approximately 60 minutes. But if you can't make it live, there will also be a recording that you can just join. So if that is something that speaks to you, I'll put the link in the description of this video, and I would be happy to welcome you there. I will of course also be back tomorrow for the next part of From Logic to Living. And tomorrow we will be starting phase 2, which is really talking more about the shift. So how do we activate? So we've talked a lot about control and what keeps us stuck and all these things. But now what I want to shift into is more like coming back to the activation of desire and our intuition, and what actually happens when we shift out of these old patterns. Okay. Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow here again, and have a good rest of your afternoon. Sending you much love and light.